next, I do want to hear from Lucy about South of Midnight. Are you the only one that played that, or
No,
I
Ralph
played
played it. Ralph played it.
Oh,
go to
okay,
Ralph because
all right.
I've played a lot. I feel like
Yeah.
I have the same opinion on it as Ralph.
Yeah, look, so South of Midnight, it's from Compulsion Games, and they had earlier done Contrast and We Happy Few. It is the first game they're making under, when they were owned by Microsoft. It's the first game that they've been working on it for like 6 years or whatever. It's set in the Deep South, like, Southern Gothic kind of setting. It's fucked up and weird, like Southern Gothic Alice in Wonderland is kind of a good way to sum it up.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it. I
Really?
Yeah,
I
I
wasn't
did.
sure what to make of it.
No, I definitely did. I wasn't like, I love this, is incredible. I enjoyed it though, for sure. I think that, there's 3 parts to it. There's platforming, there's combat, and then there's like storytelling vibey stuff. Okay. The storytelling vibe stuff is fantastic. The setting is so beautiful and interesting, and the music is great, and all the characters you meet are super cool.
Did you see that you could have the music with lyrics and you could have it without? There was an
I
option,
didn't know
there was an
that. I
option
only
for that
heard-
in the menu.
That's cool.
Okay, no, I only heard that
really
song
cool.
at the back end that had the lyrics. Excuse me. But yeah, so that part of it's great. Then there's like the platforming stuff, which is super basic. There's really nothing to it. And I'm not sure, and I suspect it doesn't get much more sophisticated than that later on. Maybe it does, but just looking at the fundamentals of it, I can't imagine that it becomes much more
In
challenging.
a good way, that isn't inherently bad. Like if it's something that, like,
I
does it
think
feel good?
The way that I present this is like Psychonauts, okay? Psychonauts is a platformer with a little bit of combat thrown in, but ultimately it's about the storytelling and vibes. It uses its levels to tell stories. It's all about its characters. It's all about that stuff, right? The gameplay is rather incidental to that experience. And I feel like this is that. And then, interestingly enough, I say that, and a lot of people are like, this reminds me of Kena, Bridge of Spirits. I'm like, no. Kena, Bridge of Spirits had some proper combat, and the boss encounters were fucking hard, and it was like Souls-esque at times. And it was a very competently made and robust action-adventure game that wasn't putting all its weight behind its storytelling. It actually did have some gameplay chops too. I don't think South of Midnight actually has gameplay chops. Like the combat side of it, it's fine. It's perfectly fine, and that it does the job. But there's nothing there that makes me want to do more combat. It just, there's also some awkwardness in your character kit. Doesn't feel like it's fully fleshed out. So the Kena Bridge of Spirits comparison, I think, is not right. And I think people, when they experience this for themselves, will come to that same conclusion. I think Psychonauts is much neater because it's like, why are you playing this game?
That's high praise. Psychonauts rules.
Yeah, but I also don't think it's as good as what Psychonauts is doing. Because I think Psychonauts is incredible. I think it's like one of the best Xbox games ever, and I think this is in that same vein. But who knows? Like, maybe it is. Maybe I've only played 1 chapter, and of what I assume will be like a 10-hour game. I played it for like 2 hours, or whatever. So I like this for sure. I'm really looking forward to playing through the rest of it, which is a 10 hours ish. Really nice world and storytelling and music and characters, and just have a nice, pleasant, low stakes experience. And that's it. And
What is the combat? I'm unclear.
The combat is literally. The combat is there's no enemies. There are no enemies out in the open world. It's just like you go to these arenas, and then all of a sudden, invisible walls pop up around you. Enemies spawn in waves. It's pretty tricky, actually, which is quite weird because the rest of the game is really chill and low stakes. And then all of a sudden, combat starts, and it's kind of hard. And I died a few times. I had a few close calls. Difficulty does not feel well calibrated versus the overall experience. However, there are difficulty options and what have you. But by default, it feels a bit strange. But really, it really is just like enemies swarm around you. You hit them with a basic attack a couple of times. There's a dodge button. You've got a few abilities that like either push enemies away from you or pull them towards you or stun you. And that's it.
So it's like your standard hack and slash with a little bit of flavor.
I think standard is probably too generous a term. I would say it's very bare bones hack and slash. Okay. Yeah, I would say that's where I'd put that. It does the job. It's pacing in the overall adventure. I think you'll die a few times because it's trickier than you'd expect, and that again serves the pacing because pads out the game length a little bit if you have to do a few sequences a few times. But again, I don't imagine, unless something substantially changes, I don't imagine people are going to be playing this for the gameplay or really singing its gameplay praises. it's about the other stuff.
Yeah, I was actually surprised at some of the places the story went. Even in that even in that one chapter, I felt quite. I don't know. I felt quite emotionally affected by it. I was really. I mean, I think another, to the Kana comparisons, I did kind of, get that vibe of you are solving people's pain, you're following this kind of ghostly spirit thing, and you can, I don't know, get to the root of people's pains, kind of like Psychonauts 2, obviously, but like I think Kana, and I guess that
Kana ruled. I really haven't thought about that game since now. That game was sick. Yeah,
I liked it.
Yeah.
And yeah, to Ralph's point, the vibes and everything were so good, the music and just the way that levels were kind of set out, I really enjoyed it. But the story is what leapt out at me the most. It was, just done in a really, I don't want to spoil what happens in it.
Me too. I didn't spoil
because,
it
I mean, it's certainly what they're selling it on. Like, I feel like the thing from the trailers that I keep taking away whenever I see this game is the world seems very interesting and unique and full and vibrant. More so than the gameplay for sure. So I get they're probably recognizing that as a strength.
Yeah.
And hinging the game on it. And it's like, I feel like we kind of don't get that many. There was definitely an era where I was playing games like that all the time, where I was like, I'm here for the story, and I don't do that much anymore. Like because they're all so big and so RPG.
I think that still exists on the indie side. I think it's pretty
totally
common on the indie side, but not. Yeah, you're right. Not from bigger publishers, and that's what makes Psychonauts stand out. I think it's quite unique still to this day, and I think this is following in that same vein.
How did you like the stop motion?
I love it personally. A lot of people really are really against it, and they're like, I just can't handle it. I'm like, okay, fair enough. Obviously, it's a stylistic choice. It?
I think that is something that's easy to be against from afar, but when you play it, you go, oh, cool.
But having played it, I don't think it's actually that different than what you see in the trailers. I think it's the same, and people just for some reason don't like that.
I think it can be hard to look at because like Spider-Man did that too, right? And when you saw it, you're like, but then you play it and it doesn't bother you.
But then there was also Sable. Sable was like, I love Sable. Incredible game.
You were big on that.
I loved it. But that was also the protagonist would move around at a lower frame rate, was animated at a lower frame rate than the rest of the game. And a lot of people found that quite jarring as well. And I can understand how that kind of visual thing catches on the eye the way that like a weird sound catches on the ear. I get it. But me personally, though, it didn't bother me. And I think it's an interesting stylistic choice that I'm like, all right, cool. You want to try some funky things? Go for it. It's all good. But yeah, some people definitely. Did you? You didn't like it?
No, I liked it. I was actually I was surprised that it wasn't as pronounced as I thought it was going to be. I thought they were really going to go, and it would be apparent in all instances of when I was playing. But there's definitely certain moments and certain characters that are more in that stop motion style than. I was also a little bit wary of it because I was afraid it might trigger my motion sickness, but it didn't. You can turn it off if it does. But
are enemies in stop motion in combat?
No.
Okay,
they're full frame rate. Yeah, cool. And they're shooting for 60 FPS. 60 FPS on consoles. That's 1080p at the Series S and 4K on the X and obviously PC your mileage may vary. So yeah,
cool.
But it's looking cool. Don't expect this one to set the world on fire. I would say don't expect. This is not the game of the year contender. I would say that's fine. Not every game needs to be. It's just a cool little game that a studio is making, and I'm glad they're making it. And I enjoyed what I played, and I'm keen to play more of it.
I love a cute little AA.
But also, and can I just say this conversation about like Game Pass game? It's a Game Pass game. It's a Game Pass game. It's like, okay, sure. That is a pejorative sometimes, absolutely, where they're like, you suggest that games are bad and so they have to rely on Game Pass. That's a fact that sometimes that's the case. Sometimes though, that it's a different thing when we talk about small indies getting onto Game Pass, because what that does at that point is it puts that game in front of people who never would have looked at it, who never would have shelled out for it, because that's just not people's buying habits these days. Like they have evolved. And so when I say that this is a perfect game for Game Pass, that's not like brackets derogatory. It's brackets, like complimentary. It's like brackets optimistic about the fact that, people will give this one a go that otherwise wouldn't do that. So yeah, that's one of the upsides for Game Pass that I think is really, really overlooked. And I think having spoken to indie devs in the past, they definitely acknowledge how beneficial Game Pass can be to their business model.